Minister Joan Burton, thank you very much for speaking to TheJournal.ie. You are widely seen as the favourite, almost the inevitable next Taoiseach. Are you worried this is going to harm your chances, this inevitability about your leadership?
Well, I really think you have to wait until you see how the electorate have voted. So I've been involved in a very intense round of hustings and meetings about the election, and the response and the feedback is strong. But I'm a great believer in elections, in leaving nothing to chance. So the actual voting doesn't close until the 4th of July. We have some more hustings this week. So what I'm doing from now on is just encouraging people to just get out and vote.
Yeah, there was a story on the front of the Sunday Independent yesterday which seemed to be saying that through back channels your advisors and the Kennys have been having discussions about the plans after you're elected leader. Has that been happening?
I have myself and my advisors a lot of discussions with the Taoiseach's office and obviously with the Taoiseach's office. In recent times, for instance, a lot of those discussions have been around my bringing in legislation in relation to transgender people, and I'm happy to say that we brought it successfully through the Cabinet last week and agreed between the two parties. But all of the time we're in constant touch with the Taoiseach's department and with the advisors. It would be utterly presumptuous to be involved in discussions like that because, as I said, first of all I have to go out and win the support and the trust of Labour Party members, and that's what I'm concentrating on, and that has my full attention at the moment.
So no talks on a new coalition deal at the moment?
As I said, I'm awaiting the outcome of the vote on the 4th of July. We still have a number of hustings meetings to take place, and I have a lot of people to talk to.
Why is it only now that the Labour Party is starting to listen to people? I mean, for 3 years you voted through every cut, every charge, every levy. People have been very annoyed about that, but it's only now that Labour is deciding that actually we need to take real action here in government because we got a kicking at the ballot box.
Well, first of all, as Deputy Leader, I've been around the country as Deputy Leader and as Minister for Social Protection to pretty much every community in Ireland over the last 3 years. That's been a great privilege, but it's also been a very strong message around people's concerns that I've heard. I would say in relation to the Labour Party, when we set out our programme and manifesto for government for 2011, we did that in good faith. People forget now, but a couple of months after the government was elected, we had the Euro crisis, in which pretty much all the predictions that had been made, not by us, but by organisations like the IMF and the Troika, about what the rate of growth would be in Ireland, just literally fell apart. So in fact, not only did we have a crisis going into government, but in the summer and the autumn after we had gone into government, the euro was close to crashing, and there was an enormous tightening in terms of availability of funding and so on to countries like Ireland. So circumstances did change that we simply had not anticipated, that the euro would go into meltdown. Secondly, I would say as well that the focus of the government has been on getting people back to work and getting businesses back into business. The critical thing around that has been the debt structure that we inherited and the cost of servicing that debt. That turned out to be significantly higher, particularly the prom note, which was going to require us to pay 3.1 billion each year. Now, I would have thought, and I said, and I was probably one of the few politicians in the 2011 general election to say that the prom note had to be, the promissory note had to be renegotiated. That negotiation, frankly, took an awful lot of extra time simply because of the potential crash of the euro, which in the end didn't happen. But all of that has put, if you like, the recovery in Ireland back by at least a year and a half to where I would have thought it would have been when we went into the general election. And what we have done, though, in terms of, if you like, commitments, is I said the Labour Party said our biggest job would be to recover the economy, make Ireland have a capacity again to borrow on international markets, get people back to work and get credit flowing. On the credit flowing, we have a way to go, but they were, if you like, overall promises about what we were going to try and achieve in terms of the economic landscape. And I would say to you that we've had significant successes. Another promise we made, which people sometimes forget, was that we would reinstate the cuts that were made in the minimum wage. I did that in the first social welfare bill. So, you know, I would say that we have some very, very solid achievements. On other things, of course, we've disappointed
let's
people.
Talk about those mistakes then. I mean, is there a single, or are there a couple of areas? Pick one area where you think Labour made a mistake under the leadership of Eamon Gilmore and government.
Well, I said during the course of this recent election that the way the discretionary medical cards were being handled, and I said this in the course of the election, I thought, was a mistake. And I'm glad that that is now, being reviewed. The other one that at the hustings comes up for a lot of mentions is the whole issue of how the Labour Party has, if you like, responded when Fine Gael ministers have had difficulties. This has been mentioned at the kind of 5 to 7 meetings that I've been at now, some of them public, a couple of them, with just Labour Party members, like in Limerick last night. And that has come up for mention over and over again, that the Labour Party wasn't sufficiently assertive when there were mistakes made by Fine Gael ministers. And
such as?
Well, the whole issue around the controversies surrounding, say for instance, Alan Shatter, and the controversies surrounding James Riley, they would be the two that people mention the most.
Pushed for Alan Shatter to resign sooner than he
Well,
did.
you see, this is a really difficult thing in relation to any partnership in government, because remember, a partnership government which took over in extraordinarily difficult circumstances, the critical thing from the country's point of view, not the comfort of the political parties in the coalition, is to actually secure the country's future. So good working relationships and trust are an essential. So therefore, if you like, each party leader obviously is responsible for the people they select to be in government. And clearly, as I said, listening to Labour Party members, they certainly felt that, for instance, if you take, say, the justice issues, the Labour Party's agenda and our indication before the last election was that we wanted an independent policing authority. We're now going to get that. Now, I suppose the issue is, to some extent, if you're being very political about it, is will voters in due course, when they see improvements in policing, see the improvements that have come and the improvements in policing oversight in terms of GSOC, fundamental issues in any democratic society, will they in the longer period see that in fact the changes have actually given us a Garda force that has the respect and confidence and trust of people, and an oversight structure that really works. Perhaps we should have this conversation again maybe in a couple of years and see how it has worked out, because bringing change, changing structures in terms of accountability, changing structures in terms of what they cost, anything like that that impacts on people, it's actually very difficult to do in government.
Okay. How has austerity affected you personally in the last 3 years?
Well, I would say that first of all, I'm very lucky to have a job. I have a job that I enjoy and that I relish, and I'm very conscious of quite a number of people I would know personally in my personal life who lost their jobs or who lost their businesses, and the difficulty, the enormous difficulty that has caused them and their families. So I'm speaking from a relative position of fortune in relation to what happened. Personally, as a TD, as a minister, obviously there have been very significant proper reductions in salaries that I've supported, and supported, by the way, when we were in opposition.
Should you have taken a bigger pay cut?
Well, I think that that's a matter for the whole of the government to agree, but I was somebody who in 2008, 2009, I was one of the people, there was a number of people across all parties who suggested that, you know, in those days, for instance, hard for people to remember now, somebody like a senior government minister earned, you know, 220,000 a year. That now that's before tax, obviously, but that has come down basically by a third plus. In the scale of things, that's a very significant reduction, but we now have those a structure which is tied very much to the public service, and the public service have taken significant reductions and also significant increases in various taxes and levies. As I say, that's a matter essentially for both parties in a coalition to decide, but certainly I'd say overall somewhere between 27 and 30% of a reduction, but I'm not complaining about that because I supported it.
Okay. How do you feel about the IMF tacitly endorsing your leadership bid last week? That was a welcome endorsement or not so welcome?
The thing that I welcomed in the IMF report was the fact that they noted really strongly that Ireland could now borrow money very cheaply at just ahead of German rates. They then made a factual comment about politics in Ireland and about people, you know, not having a political reaction against all of the changes that had taken place. They name-checked Eamon Gilmore. As it happened, they didn't name-check me. But what I would say about the IMF is the IMF a couple of years ago acknowledged that the work they had done in relation to reductions in spending in different countries, that they had totally underestimated the impact on the economy and on the psyche of people in countries of the reductions that they proposed. I've been both a critic of the IMF and on other issues I think the IMF has given Ireland good advice. For instance, the IMF have been relentless in advising that we need to do more to help to get people back to work. So, you know, my relationship with the IMF would be a working business relationship, but I would say that in terms of their comment, in terms of the Labour Party and in terms of the impact of the election on Eamon as leader of the party, well, I think they're just noting, you know, what the actual results of the elections are.
You don't think it was an endorsement?
Absolutely not. Okay. Because, as I say, in the past I would have areas. I, for instance, profoundly disagreed with the bank guarantee, and I advised the Labour Party to vote against the bank guarantee. Took a lot of stick for that at the time, because people said somehow or other I wasn't pulling on, you know, some kind of green jersey, but I felt it was a disaster. I think that organisations like the IMF found the bank guarantee quite bewildering, but as I say, I would be very supportive on their drive to, or let's say their advice on getting people and businesses back to work. I share that, but on other things, and by the way, I saw the IMF at first hand in the 1980s when I worked in East Africa. I think to have an economic analysis that doesn't include a social impact analysis in any country, anywhere in the world, I would certainly fault that, and that's been part of my, you know, my discussion with them.
You have voted through everything at cabinet level for the last 3 years. Every child benefit cut, every tax, every charge, every levy. You know, water charges, and they see you going for the leadership, and they think, well, you know, she's been part of the government that's caused all these issues and caused all these problems for the Labour Party.
Well, I mean, I take responsibility.
Yeah. But what alternative can you offer?
Well, the alternative. Well, first of all, I would say this: and this is important for people to appreciate. The economy is now entering a different phase. We had the end of May figures, for instance, for the first 5 months of the year, and essentially the economy at this point is £500 million roughly ahead in terms of target targets. That means that we're in a different place coming up to the budget to where we were over the last 3 years. Now, I would absolutely defend the country recovering its capacity to borrow at cheap rates of interest. I do know that there are many on both the extreme left and the extreme right who basically suggested that Ireland should default. I never thought that that was a realistic option, but the consequence of that, for instance, if you see Argentina nowadays, they had a default around the early 2000s. They've never actually emerged from that. We're now as a country in a different place.
Okay, but we're there. I mean, but you're talking about offering an alternative. So what? I mean, you know, Eamon Gilmore could pursue the path that the government is now trying to pursue, could he not?
Well, you could argue that, but Eamon made the decision himself to step down in the context of the election results. It has been very difficult for people, but for instance, on social protection, I've been involved in three things really. One is seeking to maintain the core weekly social welfare rates for people. The second has been a huge effort to make the department into a public employment service and to get people back to work. We now have, as an economy, an extra 70,000 people at work. Internationally, in terms of the assessment of Ireland, that's a huge achievement, and it's not perhaps something that's rated by a lot of people in Ireland. The third thing I've set out to do in the department has been to actually take action against fraud in the social welfare system, because as people in work, the people who are paying the PAYE and the PRSI, who actually pay for the costs of social protection and for the costs of pensions. So I'm certainly prepared to discuss with anybody what I've done in terms of social protection.
But I'm asking you what alternative you're offering, and you still really haven't.
The alternative, well, the alternative that I'm offering is to focus relentlessly on people getting back to work, to focus on people who pay taxes and who pay PRSI, getting value for that money, so that money is spent, as people broadly in Ireland agree, on a good, strong social welfare system, most of which, by the way, goes to our pensioners, and another large tranche goes, for instance, to child benefits. And I think what people want, there are people who, for instance, want to see state spending on areas like welfare in Ireland just completely slashed. I've argued against that. When I came in to government, there were suggestions from, you know, various helpful advisory groups to cut more, particularly in relation to retired people. I resisted that. We still had to find savings, and as I say, that was done in the context of my looking at how we would best do this, while, as I say, getting people back to work. Last year, for instance, the actions around fraud in the social welfare system, the actions against fraud, resulted in recoveries of funds of about 73 million. I would just say to your readers and your viewers, that's roughly equivalent to what we as a country spend on a very iconic benefit for retired people, which is the free travel. So, you know, if you do those kind of reforms, and that's what I would very much propose to continue to do, you get better value for the people who pay the taxes, better delivery of services, but you also get people back to work.
Do you want to stay in social protection if you're leader of the Labour?
Well, I haven't made any decisions. Like our earlier conversation, I've made no decisions about anything. I'm just concentrating. I'm certainly really committed to social protection. To be honest, I feel very passionate about it, because I think that the people in Irish society who are the most vulnerable. I have made no decisions about anything. Right. It depends on the outcome of the election.
Okay, where do you see the Labour Party in 5 years?
Well, where I'd like to see the Labour Party in 5 years is to be recovered as a party. In 5 years' time, we will be just around or just after the time of the next local elections. I'd like to see we have a lot of candidates who were very fine councillors and worked hard for their local community. if you like, a lot of that was swept aside and really not considered by voters in the current election. I would like to change that narrative, but I'd also like to see a campaigning Labour Party. I mean, things we have to do next year and this year in government is to prepare, for instance, for the marriage equality referendum. That requires a lot of detailed preparation, my own view, and I'll be working, I hope, with civil society to persuade Irish voters to agree to that. So there's a huge amount, for instance, of social reform to do. I'd also like, if I did become Labour leader, to see a greater emphasis in this government in relation to areas like culture, because again, you know, I think we've, if you like, done a lot of the repair work on the economy. And what I'm saying to people in the Labour Party is now we need to look at the repair of Irish society, because Irish society without a doubt has suffered, and people and families and communities have suffered. I'd like to see that.
Would you like to see the Labour Party in government?
Yes, I think if you're a social democratic party, as the Labour Party is, committed to, if you like, a mixed economy, a strong private sector with strong businesses, and particularly SMEs, because that's where the employment growth is, but also a strong welfare system that's there, as I often say, as a kind of trampoline. In other words, it catches you and cushions you if, for instance, you lose your job or you become ill. It provides in terms of retirement pensions, but on the other hand, it's like a springboard. It lifts you back up.
You wouldn't like to see your party in government with Sinn Féin. You've made that very clear, and you've spoken about the Sinn Féin IRA nexus. What does Sinn Féin need to do to rid itself of that nexus?
Well, I think that's a matter for Sinn Féin.
You've raised it, so what's your opinion on it?
I wouldn't dream of giving Sinn Féin detailed advice on what it is they need to do. I just gave my own view that there are unanswered questions there, and there are issues there. The Labour Party is a social democratic party. All throughout the troubles in the north, and I recognise, by the way, that Sinn Féin and the current leadership joined the peace process, led, by the way, by people like John Hume and Seamus Mallon, but I have always preferred the path of non-violence, and that was a choice I would have made politically, when I was much younger. The point I would make as well is that I would see Sinn Féin as being intensely a populist party. I mean, for instance, in the local elections, they promised to remove property tax, water charges, pretty much do away with USC. Now, I would like to see, and I'm sure people like yourselves in the media will actually ask them, and how will those proposals add up? There are proposals, for instance, for additional taxation of several billion to come from quite a narrow side of the economy. I'm just not sure that some of the proposals that they have are quite feasible. Well, I'm in favour of legalising cannabis in relation to medical use. I have a serious doubt in relation to the impact, particularly on a proportion of young people who use cannabis in terms of what may well be mental health consequences for them, and I'm concerned about that. So for medical use and pain relief, I'm completely in favour.
Okay, and I have to ask, as I asked Alex White, have you ever smoked cannabis?
No, I've never smoked.
Good. People have also asked, what do you make of Mario Rosenstock's impressions of you?
Well, on the occasion that I've met him on a couple of occasions, I keep telling him, work on that voice. It's good, but it's not quite good enough. Look, I think he's very funny, and I've gone to his show, and he's great. I prefer his Jose Mourinho, to be honest. I think he does that much better.
And finally, who do you think is going to win the World Cup?
I kind of fancy France winning. Obviously, like, I'm on the hustings, I see it in a distant kind of corner of a room. I've had very little chance to watch it. I hope that what I'll get to watch over the summer is the Dubs, and hopefully they are in winning form, so hopefully that will continue. Right. So can I make a prediction then on the All-Ireland?
You can.
I think the Dubs will be in that.
Joan Burton, thank you very much.
Okay.